My name is Stephanie Martinez, and I'm 29 years old. For 7 years, my family believed I was living a lie, pretending to have a military career that they were convinced didn't exist. Last Tuesday, while sitting at my nephew's birthday party, I received a phone call that would silence every doubt, every snide comment, and every rolled eye I'd endured. But the journey to that moment began in a small ranch house in Bakersfield, California, where being different meant being wrong. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Growing up as the youngest of 4 children in the Martinez household meant learning early that conformity was survival. My father, Roberto Martinez, had built his landscaping business, Desert Bloom Landscaping, from nothing more than a pickup truck and a borrowed lawnmower in 1985. He was a man who measured success in tangible things: the trucks in his driveway, the crew he employed, the houses he'd bought and paid off. In our family, success meant following the path he'd carved out, and that path was clear and narrow. My 3 older siblings had all fallen in line perfectly. Miguel, the eldest at 35, had taken over the day-to-day operations of the business. Sophia, 33, had married young, moved 2 streets over, and was raising 4 children while helping with the company's bookkeeping. Carlos, 31, managed the crew and handled the bigger commercial contracts. They all lived within a 5-mile radius of our childhood home, gathering every Sunday for dinner, their lives intertwined with the family business like roots in fertile soil. Then there was me, the anomaly. From my earliest memories, I was drawn to things that made no sense to my family. While my siblings played in the backyard, I read books about world history and different countries. While they helped sort supplies for the landscaping jobs, I watched documentaries about the military and intelligence operations. When other kids my age were interested in movies and music, I was fascinated by languages, learning Spanish fluently at home and teaching myself basic French and German through library books. My mother, Carmen, tried to bridge the gap between my father's expectations and my obvious differences. She would quietly encourage my interests while making sure I still participated in family obligations. She'd slip me new books when my father wasn't looking, but always reminded me to help with Sunday dinner preparation. She loved me, I knew that, but she had learned long ago that keeping peace in the Martinez household meant not challenging Roberto's vision of how things should be. The first real conflict came when I was 16. My high school counselor, Mrs. Peterson, called home to discuss my exceptional performance in advanced placement courses and to suggest I consider applying to military academies or universities with strong international relations programs. She mentioned that my aptitude scores were in the top 1% nationally and that I showed particular promise in analytical thinking and problem solving. My father listened politely to Mrs. Peterson's call, thanked her for her time, and never mentioned it to me. It was my mother who finally told me about the conversation 3 weeks later, while we were alone in the kitchen preparing tamales for a family gathering. "Mrs. Peterson thinks you could get into some very good schools," she said carefully, not meeting my eyes as she spread masa on corn husks. "What did Dad say?" I asked, though I already knew from her hesitant tone. "He said you had responsibilities here, that family comes first." When I directly asked my father about college that evening, his response was swift and final. "College is expensive, mija. The business needs you. Your siblings all found their place here. You will too." But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something bigger waiting for me beyond the borders of Bakersfield. I began researching military careers in secret, using the computers at the public library after school. I learned about the different branches, the education benefits, the opportunities to serve something larger than myself. The more I read, the more convinced I became that this was my path. The military offered everything I craved: structure, purpose, intellectual challenge, and the chance to see the world beyond the San Joaquin Valley. It also offered something my family couldn't understand: the opportunity to serve my country while building a career based on merit rather than family connections. I made my decision during senior year, but I knew better than to announce it at Sunday dinner. Instead, I confided in my older brother Carlos, who had always been the most reasonable of my siblings.
We were sitting on the tailgate of his truck after a long day helping with a commercial installation, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. "I'm thinking about joining the Air Force," I said quietly. Carlos stopped drinking his beer and looked at me seriously. "The military? Stephanie, that's not for people like us. That's for kids who don't have options." "What if I want it to be my option?" He shook his head slowly. "Dad will never understand. You know that, right? He sees the military as something that takes kids away from their families. He won't see it as a career." "Maybe it's time someone in this family chose a different path," I said. "And maybe it's time you realized that different isn't always better," he replied. That conversation crystallized something for me. I realized that mas than my families love conditional on my conformity. They would support me as long as I stayed within the boundaries they understood. Venture outside those boundaries, and I would be on my own. I spent the rest of senior year preparing in secret. I met with military recruiters at school, took the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, and scored high enough to qualify for nearly any military occupation I wanted. The recruiter, Staff Sergeant Williams, was particularly interested in my language abilities and analytical skills. "Have you considered intelligence work?" she asked during one of our meetings. "Your profile suggests you'd excel in that field." Intelligence work. The phrase sent a thrill through me that I tried to hide. It sounded important, challenging, and completely different from anything anyone in my family had ever done. I graduated high school with honors, but the celebration at our house was muted. While my classmates talked excitedly about college plans and future careers, I sat quietly at my graduation party, knowing that I was about to shatter my family's expectations in a way that might never be forgiven. The night before I was scheduled to leave for basic training, I finally told my parents. We were sitting in the living room, the same room where every major family decision had been made for as long as I could remember. My father was in his usual chair, still wearing his work clothes, tired from a long day managing crews. My mother sat on the couch, folding laundry with the mechanical precision of someone who had done the task thousands of times. "I need to tell you both something," I began, my heart hammering against my ribs. They both looked up, and I saw my mother's face immediately tense with worry. "I've enlisted in the Air Force. I leave for basic training tomorrow morning." The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced in our usually noisy household. My father's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally a cold anger that made my stomach clench. "You what?" he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I've joined the military. It's what I want to do with my life." "Without discussing it with your family? Without considering how this affects all of us?" My mother was crying now, quiet tears that she tried to hide behind the shirt she was folding. "This is what happens when you fill a girl's head with ridiculous ideas," my father continued, his voice rising. "The military is not for our family, Stephanie. We are not that kind of people."
What kind of people are we, Dad? I asked, finding courage I didn't know I possessed. "We are people who stick together, who build something lasting, who don't abandon their responsibilities for some fantasy about playing soldier." The words hit me like physical blows, but I stood my ground. "This isn't a fantasy. It's a career. It's my choice." "Your choice?" He stood up now, his full height and anger filling the room. "Your choice is to throw away everything your family has built? To turn your back on people who love you for some stranger in a uniform who promises you adventure?" "It's my choice to serve my country and build my own life," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. My father stared at me for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was cold and final. "If you walk out that door tomorrow, don't expect to come crawling back when this military fantasy falls apart. And don't expect us to pretend you're doing something important when you're really just running away from your real responsibilities." That night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the remnants of 18 years of life in this house. My suitcase sat by the door, packed with the few belongings I was allowed to bring to basic training. I listened to the familiar sounds of the house settling, my parents' muffled conversation from their bedroom, the distant hum of traffic on Highway 99. I thought about my father's words and wondered if he might be right. Was I running away? Was I abandoning my family for a fantasy? But then I thought about the feeling I got when I imagined myself in uniform, serving something bigger than myself, using my mind to protect my country in ways I couldn't even fully understand yet. At dawn, I carried my suitcase to the living room where my mother waited with coffee and breakfast. I was too nervous to eat. She hugged me tightly, whispering prayers in Spanish, and promised to write every week. My father had already left for work, his absence a statement louder than any argument could have been. As the taxi pulled away from the only home I'd ever known, I watched the small ranch house shrink in the rear window and made a silent promise. I would prove that this wasn't a fantasy or a phase. I would show my family that serving my country was not only a legitimate career, but one that would make them proud, even if they couldn't see it yet. I had no idea then how completely that promise would transform not just my life, but my understanding of what family, loyalty, and service really meant. Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas was a shock to every sense I possessed. The humidity hit me like a wall the moment I stepped off the bus, and the shouting began before my feet touched the pavement. Technical instructor Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had a voice that could strip paint and a glare that made grown recruits question every life decision that had brought them to this moment. For 8 weeks, my world consisted of a 6 by 3 foot space around my bunk, pre-dawn wake-up calls, and the constant challenge of proving I belonged among the other recruits who seemed more naturally suited to military life. Many of my fellow trainees came from military families or had dreamed of service since childhood. I was surrounded by people named Connor Williams from Nebraska, whose grandfather had been a Navy admiral, and Jessica Thompson from Alabama, whose 3 brothers were all Marines. Then there was me, Stephanie Martinez from Bakersfield, whose family thought I was making the biggest mistake of my life. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The physical demands were brutal. I had never been particularly athletic, and the daily runs, obstacle courses, and strength training pushed my body beyond anything I thought possible. But what surprised me was how much I thrived under the mental pressure. While other recruits struggled with the academic components, I excelled at the strategic thinking exercises, the problem-solving scenarios, and the leadership challenges. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez noticed. 3 weeks into training, she pulled me aside after a particularly complex team exercise where I had successfully coordinated our squad through a simulated crisis scenario. "Martinez," she said, her usual bark replaced by something approaching interest, "your test scores show aptitude for intelligence work. Have you given any thought to your career field?" I had been so focused on surviving each day that I hadn't thought much beyond graduation. "I'm interested in intelligence, Staff Sergeant." Intelligence isn't for everyone. It requires absolute discretion, analytical thinking under pressure, and the ability to see patterns others miss. It also means your family might never fully understand what you do for a living. That last comment hit closer to home than she could have known. My family already didn't understand what I was doing. Letter writing was mandatory during basic training, and every week I dutifully wrote to my parents and siblings. My mother's responses came regularly, filled with news about neighbors and updates on the landscaping business. She never directly mentioned my choice to join the military, but she always ended with, "We love you and pray for you every day." My father never wrote back. My siblings' responses were sporadic and awkward. Miguel sent a brief note saying business was good and they missed having my help during the busy season. Sophia wrote about her kids and included photos, but never asked about my training or experiences. Carlos, who I had hoped might be more understanding, sent exactly one letter that simply said, "Hope you're learning whatever it is you went there to learn. Dad's still not talking about it." The silence from my family was almost harder to bear than the physical demands of training. During the few minutes of free time we had each evening, I would sit on my bunk and wonder if I had made a terrible mistake.
Around me, other recruits talked excitedly about visiting home during their first leave, about family members who were planning graduation ceremonies, about parents who called the base to check on their progress. I had none of that. My graduation from basic training would be attended by no one. The night before graduation, I called home from the payphone outside the dormitory. My mother answered on the second ring. Miha, how are you? We've been worried. I graduate tomorrow, Mom. There was a pause. That's wonderful, honey. We're proud of you. But I could hear the distance in her voice, the careful way she chose her words. Is Dad there? I asked. Another pause. He's working on the books for tomorrow's jobs. We both knew that wasn't true. It was 8 o'clock on a Thursday evening. Dad was probably in his chair watching television, deliberately unavailable for my call. Tell him I graduated with honors, I said. Tell him I'm being assigned to intelligence work. Intelligence? My mother's voice carried confusion and worry. What does that mean? It means I'll be working to protect our country, Mom. It's important work. I'm sure it is, Miha. I don't understand any of this. Neither did I completely, but I was about to learn. My first assignment was to Goodfellow Air Force Base in San Angelo, Texas for intelligence training. If basic training had been about breaking down civilian habits and rebuilding military discipline, intelligence school was about learning to see the world through an entirely different lens. The Intelligence Analyst course was 6 months of intensive study covering everything from geopolitical analysis to satellite imagery interpretation. I learned to read between the lines of foreign communications, to identify patterns in seemingly random data, and to synthesize information from multiple sources into actionable intelligence reports. My instructors were career intelligence professionals who treated our education with the gravity it deserved. Captain Jennifer Walsh, our primary instructor, was a 15-year veteran who had deployed to conflicts I couldn't even discuss with my family. She recognized something in my approach to the work that even I didn't fully understand yet. Martinez, she said, after I had turned in a particularly complex analysis of insurgent communication patterns, you have an intuitive understanding of how to connect disparate pieces of information. That's not something we can teach. The coursework was classified at levels I had never imagined existed. I signed documents promising to protect information that could affect national security, swearing oaths that made my head spin with their implications. Everything I was learning, everything I was becoming qualified to do, was knowledge I could never share with my family. This created a strange double life. During my weekly phone calls home, I found myself speaking in increasingly vague terms about my training. What exactly do you do all day? My mother would ask. I study maps and reports, I would say, which was technically true, but revealed nothing about the complexity and importance of the work. Maps of what? Reports about what? I can't really get into the details, Mom. Some of it's classified. I could hear the frustration in her voice, and I knew that my family's skepticism was only growing. To them, my inability to clearly explain my job probably sounded like evidence that I was making it up or exaggerating its importance. The truth was exactly the opposite. I was being trained for work that was more vital and complex than anything I could have imagined when I left Bakersfield. But the very nature of that work meant I couldn't prove its importance to the people whose approval I most wanted. During intelligence school, I excelled in every area, but particularly in something called all-source analysis, the ability to take information from human intelligence, signals intelligence, imagery, and open sources, and weave them together into a comprehensive understanding of threats and situations. My instructors began hinting that I might be selected for advanced assignments after graduation.
The agency has been asking about promising new analysts, Captain Walsh mentioned during one of our individual counseling sessions. Your profile matches what they're looking for. The agency? I asked. CIA. They recruit from military intelligence programs. It would mean even more specialized training, higher clearance levels, and assignments that could take you anywhere in the world. The possibility was thrilling and terrifying. It would also mean even greater distance from my family, both geographically and in terms of what I could share about my life. I graduated from intelligence school ranked second in my class of 47 students.
My first assignment was to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson, Arizona, working as an intelligence analyst supporting combat operations overseas. I would be responsible for providing targeting information and threat assessments for pilots flying missions in active combat zones. The weight of that responsibility was staggering. Decisions I made in an air-conditioned office in Arizona could directly impact the safety of American service members thousands of miles away. It was exactly the kind of meaningful work I had hoped to find when I left home, but it came with a burden I hadn't anticipated. My family's reaction to my first real assignment was predictably lukewarm. When I called to tell them I was being stationed in Arizona, my father finally came to the phone. "Arizona?" he said. "What are you going to do in Arizona?" "I'll be working as an intelligence analyst, Dad." "Intelligence analyst," he repeated, and I could hear the skepticism in his voice. "What does that actually mean, Stephanie?" I tried to explain in terms he might understand. I analyze information that helps keep our military personnel safe during their missions. "So you sit at a desk and read reports?" "It's more complicated than that, Dad." "I'm sure it is," he said, but his tone suggested he thought it was less complicated, not more. "Well, at least you'll be closer to home than Texas." That was the extent of his interest in my career. What my father couldn't understand, what none of my family could grasp, was that I was becoming part of something much larger and more important than they realized. Every day, I worked with information that could affect national security. My analyses contributed to decisions made at the highest levels of government. The clearance level I was being processed for would give me access to some of the most sensitive intelligence in the American government. But to my family, I was just Stephanie, sitting at a desk somewhere, doing work that sounded made up and probably wasn't as important as I claimed it was. The disconnect was becoming unbearable, but I was about to discover that the most challenging part of my military career wasn't the work itself. It was living with the secret knowledge of just how important that work really was. Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson was unlike anything I had experienced during training. The operational tempo was relentless, with real-world missions launching around the clock. I was assigned to the 563rd Intelligence Squadron, where my desk sat in a windowless room filled with computer monitors, classified communication systems, and analysts who rarely spoke above a whisper. My supervisor, Master Sergeant Patricia Coleman, was a 20-year veteran with deployment ribbons that told stories I wasn't cleared to hear. She had the kind of calm confidence that came from making life-and-death decisions under pressure, and she wasted no time in making clear that my training period was over. "Martinez, you're supporting Operation Desert Shield missions starting tomorrow," she said, handing me a thick binder marked with classification stamps I was still getting used to seeing. "You'll be responsible for threat assessments for A-10 Thunderbolt missions over northern Iraq. These pilots depend on your analysis to come home alive." The weight of those words settled over me like a lead blanket. I was 21 years old, barely 2 years removed from helping my family plant desert landscaping in suburban backyards, and now I was responsible for protecting Air Force pilots flying combat missions in hostile territory. My first real intelligence briefing was scheduled for 4 a.m. the next day. I arrived at 3:30, wanting extra time to review the overnight intelligence reports and ensuring I hadn't missed anything critical. The briefing room filled with pilots, weapons officers, and mission commanders, all of them depending on the information I was about to present. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reed, the squadron commander, introduced me simply. "Analyst Martinez will provide today's threat assessment." I stood at the front of the room, looking at 20 dozen aviators who would be flying into danger based on my analysis, and began presenting the intelligence picture. I covered surface-to-air missile threats, enemy troop movements, weather considerations, and communication intercepts that might indicate planned attacks on coalition aircraft. The questions came fast and detailed. The pilots wanted to know about specific coordinates, altitude restrictions, time-sensitive targeting opportunities. Every answer I gave could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. When the briefing ended, Lieutenant Colonel Reed pulled me aside. "Good work, Martinez. Your analysis was thorough and actionable. That's exactly what these aircrews need." It was the first time since leaving home that someone in authority had acknowledged my work as genuinely valuable. The validation felt different from academic praise. This was professional recognition from someone whose opinion carried real weight. But that satisfaction was complicated by the fact that I couldn't share it with anyone who mattered to me personally. When I called home that weekend, I found myself once again speaking in frustratingly vague terms. "How was your week, Miha?" my mother asked. "Busy. I briefed some pilots on mission planning." "That sounds important," she said, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. She was trying to be supportive of something she didn't understand. "It is important, Mom." "I'm sure it is. Your father says the landscaping season is starting early this year. Miguel hired 2 new crew members." The conversation drifted to family business, neighborhood gossip, and Sophia's children's school activities. My world of classified intelligence briefings and combat mission support might as well have been happening on another planet. After 6 months at Davis-Monthan, my security clearance investigation was completed, and I received top-secret clearance with access to sensitive compartmental information. The briefing that accompanied this clearance upgrade was sobering. I was now authorized to access intelligence that could compromise national security if improperly handled. The polygraph examination that preceded the clearance was more intensive than anything I imagined, covering not just my background, but my psychological fitness to handle extremely sensitive information. With my new clearance came new responsibilities. I was assigned to a special projects team that analyzed intelligence from multiple classified sources to identify emerging threats to American interests worldwide. The work was intellectually demanding in ways that stretched my analytical abilities to their limits.
My team leader, Captain David Kim, was a former Pentagon analyst who had requested assignment to operational units because he preferred supporting missions directly rather than working in policy circles. He became my most influential mentor during this period. "Intelligence work is about pattern recognition," he explained during one of our weekly counseling sessions. "Anyone can read a report and summarize what it says. Analysts like us identify what it means and predict what happens next." Under Captain Kim's guidance, I developed expertise in predictive analysis, using current intelligence to forecast enemy actions and recommend countermeasures. My reports began reaching higher levels of command, including theater commanders responsible for entire regions of operations. The professional growth was exhilarating, but it came at a personal cost. My family's phone calls became increasingly awkward as the gap between my actual responsibilities and what I could discuss widened. My siblings had settled into treating my military service as an extended phase that I would eventually outgrow. During one particularly difficult conversation, Carlos asked directly, "Stephanie, what exactly do you do that's so secret? It sounds like you're making this up." "I'm not making anything up, Carlos. I just can't discuss the details." "Come on, you're in the Air Force, not the CIA. How secret can it be?" The irony was that my work was beginning to intersect with CIA operations more frequently. My analysis was being shared with other intelligence agencies, and I had begun attending briefings where CIA personnel presented information alongside military intelligence officers. That intersection became more significant during my second year at Davis-Monthan. I was selected for a temporary assignment to support a joint task force investigating weapons smuggling networks in Eastern Europe. The assignment would require working directly with CIA analysts and operatives, as well as intelligence personnel from allied nations. The selection process was rigorous. I underwent additional background investigations, psychological evaluations, and specialized training in counterintelligence techniques. The assignment would last 6 months and would be conducted partly at Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado and partly at classified locations I couldn't disclose even to my family. When I called home to explain that I would be largely unreachable for several months due to a special assignment, the response was predictably skeptical. "What kind of assignment?" my father asked, his first extended conversation with me in over a year. "I can't provide details, Dad. It's classified work." "Classified," he repeated with obvious disbelief. "Stephanie, you've been saying everything is classified for 2 years. At some point, that starts to sound like an excuse." "An excuse for what?" "For not having a real job that you can actually explain to your family."
The accusation stung because it highlighted the impossible position I was in. The more important and sensitive my work became, the less I could share about it, which made it appear less legitimate to people who measured careers by their visibility and tangibility. My mother tried to mediate. Roberto, she's serving her country. That has to count for something. Serving her country by doing what? He responded. She can't tell us where she works, what she does, or why it matters. For all we know, she's filing paperwork in some office and calling it classified. That conversation haunted me throughout the special assignment. I was working 18-hour days, analyzing intelligence that was briefed to cabinet-level officials, contributing to operations that disrupted international criminal networks, and my own father thought I was probably exaggerating the importance of filing paperwork. The Joint Task Force assignment was a professional breakthrough. I worked alongside some of the most experienced intelligence professionals in the government, people whose careers spanned decades of service in the most sensitive positions imaginable. My analysis contributed to operations that resulted in the arrest of arms dealers, the seizure of illegal weapons shipments, and the disruption of networks that posed genuine threats to American security interests abroad. Major Sarah Walsh, the Task Force Intelligence Director, pulled me aside during the final week of the assignment. Martinez, your work on this task force has been exceptional. I'm recommending you for accelerated promotion and assignment to a strategic level position. Have you considered applying for the CIA's Career Analyst program? I hadn't, but the suggestion opened possibilities I had never imagined. The CIA recruited experienced military intelligence personnel for positions that operated at the intersection of military and civilian intelligence operations. It would mean even more specialized training, higher clearance levels, and work that directly supported national policy decisions. What would that involve? I asked. Advanced training at the farm, assignment to Langley or overseas stations, and intelligence work that shapes American foreign policy. It's the kind of career that few people ever get the opportunity to pursue. The opportunity was everything I had hoped for when I first decided to pursue intelligence work. It was also a path that would make my professional life even more incomprehensible to my family. When I returned to Davis-Monthan and called home to announce I was back for my special assignment, the conversation followed a familiar pattern. "How was your trip?" my mother asked. "Productive. I learned a lot and contributed to some important work." "Where did you go?" "I can't really discuss the locations, Mom." I could hear her sigh. "Stephanie, it's been 2.5 years since you joined the military. When are you going to be able to tell us what you actually do?" It was a fair question, with an answer she wouldn't want to hear. Probably never. The trajectory of my career was leading towards positions with even higher classification levels, more sensitive responsibilities, and greater restrictions on what I could share about my professional life. I was building exactly the career I had dreamed of when I left Bakersfield, but I was doing it in complete isolation from the people whose understanding and approval I still desperately wanted. The CIA Career Analyst Program application process was unlike anything I had experienced, even after years of military security clearances and specialized training. The psychological evaluation alone took 3 days, conducted by professionals who seemed to know more about my personality than I did. They probed every decision I had made since childhood, analyzed my family relationships, and tested my ability to compartmentalize information under extreme stress. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, the lead psychologist, conducted the final interview in a sterile conference room at an undisclosed location in Northern Virginia. "Ms. Martinez, your psychological profile indicates exceptional analytical capabilities combined with strong emotional resilience," she began, reviewing a file that seemed impossibly thick for someone my age. "However, there are some concerns about your family support structure. Intelligence work at the level you're pursuing can be emotionally isolating. How do you cope with the inability to share your professional accomplishments with people close to you?" It was the question I had been asking myself for months. "I focus on the mission, ma'am. The work itself provides meaning." "That's a textbook answer," Dr. Morgan observed, "but our research shows that analysts who rely solely on professional satisfaction without personal support networks have higher rates of burnout and security violations. What happens when the work isn't enough?"
I didn't have a good answer for that question, and Dr. Morgan's expression suggested she knew it. Despite the psychological evaluation concerns, I was accepted into the program. The notification came through encrypted channels while I was still stationed at Davis-Monthan, preparing for what I assumed would be my next routine Air Force assignment. The acceptance letter was brief and matter-of-fact. Report to Camp Perry, Virginia on 15 August for career analyst training. Duration, 18 months. Classification, top secret/SCI. No personal communication authorized during the initial 6-month period. 6 months of no personal communication. I stared at the letter, realizing that accepting this position would mean disappearing from my family's life completely for half a year. When I emerged, I would be qualified for intelligence work so sensitive that I might never be able to explain it to them. My final conversation with Captain Kim before leaving Davis-Monthan was sobering. "Stephanie, you're about to enter a world that very few people ever see," he said. "The training you'll receive, the clearances you'll hold, the operations you'll support, they'll fundamentally change how you see everything. Make sure you're ready for that level of responsibility." "I think I am, sir." "I think you are too, but remember that with great access comes great isolation. The people who do this work at the highest levels often struggle to maintain relationships with anyone who doesn't share their clearance level. It's something to consider." The Camp Perry facility, known within intelligence circles as the farm, was hidden in the Virginia countryside behind layers of security that made military bases look accessible. For 6 months, I lived in a world where every conversation was monitored, every lesson was classified, and contact with the outside world was completely prohibited. The training covered advanced tradecraft, psychological operations, foreign language proficiency, and analytical techniques that hadn't been developed when I was in military intelligence school. I learned to recognize deception in foreign communications, to identify patterns in terrorist financing, and to predict geopolitical developments months before they occurred. My instructors were career CIA officers whose backgrounds spanned decades of operations in every hostile environment imaginable. They treated the training with gravity that made military intelligence school seem like undergraduate coursework. "You are being prepared to provide intelligence that influences presidential decisions," explained Dr. James Harrison, our strategic analysis instructor. "Your assessments will be read by cabinet secretaries, joint chiefs, and foreign policy advisors. The margin for error is essentially zero." The other trainees in my class came from similar backgrounds: military intelligence officers, federal agents, and graduate students with advanced degrees in international relations or regional studies. We bonded over the shared experience of having left behind previous careers for something none of us could fully explain to our families. During our limited free time, conversations often turned to the personal costs of our career choices. Marcus Webb, a former FBI counterterrorism agent, had been divorced twice because of his inability to discuss his work. Jennifer Chen, an Army intelligence officer, hadn't spoken to her parents in 3 years because they thought she was wasting her life in what they assumed was a bureaucratic desk job. "The hardest part isn't the work," Jennifer confided during one of our evening study sessions. "It's watching your family lose respect for you because they think you're not accomplishing anything important." That sentiment resonated with everyone in the room. We were all pursuing careers that required us to sacrifice personal relationships for professional responsibility, and none of us were entirely sure the trade-off was worth it. When the communication blackout ended after 6 months, I called home from a secure phone at the facility. The conversation with my mother was strange and awkward. "Stephanie, is that really you? We haven't heard from you in half a year." "I'm sorry, Mom. I was in training that didn't allow personal communication." "Training for what? What kind of job requires you to disappear for 6 months without contact?" I struggled to find words that would satisfy her curiosity without violating security protocols. "Advanced intelligence, Mom. I can't provide details." "Advanced intelligence?" she repeated, and I could hear the frustration building in her voice. "Stephanie, your family doesn't even know what you do for a living. Carlos thinks you might be making all of this up." "Making up? This whole military intelligence story? He thinks maybe you left the Air Force and you're embarrassed to tell us what you're actually doing." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. My own brother thought I was lying about my career because I couldn't provide details about classified work.
Mom, I promise you I'm not making anything up. I'm serving my country in an important capacity. I just can't discuss the specifics. Then when can you discuss them? When will we know what you actually do? I don't know, Mom. Maybe never. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, my mother spoke again, her voice smaller and sadder than I had ever heard it. Your father says you've been gone so long now that you're practically not part of this family anymore. He says people who really love their families find ways to stay connected. After hanging up, I sat in the secure communication facility and cried for the first time since basic training. I was excelling in the most challenging and important work I had ever done, but I was losing my family in the process. The final 6 months of training were even more intensive, focusing on real-world case studies and current operations. I was assigned to analyze actual intelligence from ongoing operations, working alongside experienced analysts who reviewed my assessments before they were forwarded to policymakers. My specialty became predictive analysis of regional conflicts, with particular expertise in Middle Eastern political dynamics. My assessments accurately predicted several significant developments, including government instability that led to international intervention and terrorist group movements that enabled successful counterterrorism operations. Dr. Harrison called me into his office during the final week of training. Martinez, your analytical work has been exceptional. We're recommending you for assignment to the National Intelligence Council, supporting the President's daily brief. It's an extraordinary opportunity for someone at your experience level. The President's daily brief? Intelligence briefings that went directly to the Oval Office? I would be contributing to information that influenced American foreign policy decisions at the highest levels of government.
There's one consideration, Dr. Harrison continued. This assignment requires additional security protocols. Your personal communications will be monitored indefinitely. Your travel will be restricted. Your ability to maintain relationships with people outside the intelligence community will be severely limited. I thought about my family's phone calls, already strained by my inability to discuss my work. Additional restrictions would probably end those conversations entirely. I understand, sir. Do you? Because once you accept this level of responsibility, there's no going back to a normal life. Your career will be your life, and your life will be classified. 3 days before graduation from the program, I received a call that would change everything. It was Miguel, calling from a hospital in Bakersfield. Stephanie, you need to come home. Dad had a heart attack. Everything else, the prestigious assignment, the career advancement, the national security implications, suddenly seemed less important than getting home to my family. How bad is it? I asked. Bad. The doctors aren't sure if he's going to make it. Mom needs you here. I hung up and immediately requested emergency leave to return to California. The approval process required security reviews, supervisor consultations, and medical verification, bureaucratic procedures that took precious hours while my father fought for his life. When I finally boarded a plane to California, I realized I was about to face my family during the most vulnerable moment of our lives, carrying the weight of years of misunderstanding and the secret knowledge of a career they had never respected or understood. The flight from Virginia to California felt endless. I sat in the coach, surrounded by families traveling together, couples holding hands, business travelers casually discussing their work with seat neighbors. I envied their normalcy, their ability to share the basic details of their lives without considering classification levels or security protocols. When the plane landed in Bakersfield, I took a taxi directly to Mercy Hospital Southwest. The sterile hallways and antiseptic smell brought back memories of visiting my grandmother during her final illness. But this felt different, more urgent, more fragile. I found my family in the cardiac intensive care unit waiting room. Sophia sat with her head in her hands, her husband holding their youngest daughter. Carlos paced by the windows, talking quietly on his phone. Miguel stood near the nurse's station, his usual confidence replaced by the helpless expression of someone accustomed to solving problems who couldn't fix this one. My mother sat alone in a corner chair, looking smaller and more fragile than I remembered. When she saw me, tears immediately filled her eyes. "Mija, you came." Of course I came, Mom. I hugged her tightly, feeling how much weight she had lost since I had seen her last Christmas. How is he?
The doctors say the next 24 hours are critical. The damage to his heart was extensive. Sophia looked up when she heard my voice. Stephanie, I wasn't sure you'd be able to get away from your job. The way she said job carried years of accumulated skepticism. Family comes first, I said, simply. Carlos ended his phone call and approached us. I've been calling your base for 2 days trying to reach you. Nobody would tell me anything except that they would pass along the message. What kind of workplace won't let family members reach you during an emergency? The kind that requires security clearances, I replied, immediately regretting how defensive I sounded. Security clearances for what, Stephanie? Miguel joined the conversation, his voice carrying the frustration of someone who had been holding back questions for years. We're your family. We deserve to know what you actually do. Before I could respond, Dr. Patricia Valdez approached our group. Are you Mr. Martinez's family? We all turned towards her, momentarily united by concern for my father. Your father is stable for now, but he's still in critical condition. He's conscious and asking for his family. We can allow brief visits, but only immediate family members. As we walked toward the intensive care unit, Miguel pulled me aside. Before we go in there, I need you to know that Dad has been talking about you a lot since the heart attack. He's been worried that he doesn't understand your life. Worried about what, exactly? About whether you're really okay. About whether this military thing is actually working out for you, or if you're too proud to admit it's not. The irony was overwhelming. I was about to be assigned to provide intelligence briefings for the President of the United States, and my father was worried that I might be failing at a career he thought was probably imaginary. My father looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, connected to monitors and machines that beeped softly in the background. His eyes opened when I entered the room, and for a moment I saw something I hadn't seen since childhood: vulnerability. Stephanie, he said, his voice weak but clear. You came home. I came as soon as I could, Dad. He studied my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. You look different, older, more serious. For all of us, he said. Mija, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. I braced myself for another interrogation about my career. Are you happy? Really happy with the life you've chosen? The question caught me completely off guard. I had expected skepticism or demands for details about my work. Instead, he was asking about my well-being. I think so, Dad. My work is important, meaningful. But are you happy? He pressed. Do you have friends? Someone special in your life? A community? I hesitated because the honest answer was complicated. I loved my work, but Dr. Morgan's psychological evaluation had been accurate. I was professionally fulfilled, but personally isolated. I had colleagues, but few close friends. I had knowledge and responsibility, but no one to share the weight of either. My work is very demanding, Dad. It doesn't leave much time for personal relationships. That's not what I asked. His voice grew stronger, more like the father I remembered. I asked if you're happy. Before I could answer, a nurse entered to check his monitors. Mr. Martinez, you need to rest. Your family can visit again this evening. As I prepared to leave, my father reached for my hand. Stephanie, I may not understand what you do, but I can see it's important to you. I just hope it's not costing you too much. Over the next 3 days, as my father stabilized and began recovering, my family and I fell into an uneasy rhythm. I stayed at my childhood home, sleeping in my old bedroom, surrounded by remnants of the person I had been before joining the military. The contrast between my current life and this familiar environment was jarring. My extended emergency leave was approved, but I received daily encrypted communications requiring responses to ongoing intelligence situations. I found myself working on classified analysis while sitting at my family's kitchen table, the same table where I had once done high school homework. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on me. I was providing intelligence assessments that would influence American foreign policy decisions, while my family assumed I was probably on vacation from whatever desk job I had been exaggerating for years. On the 4th day, while I was working on my laptop in the backyard, Carlos confronted me directly. Stephanie, what are you actually doing on that computer? Work, I said, without looking up from an encrypted communication about developing situations in Eastern Europe. What kind of work requires you to be on a computer all day during family emergency leave? I saved my work and closed the laptop, realizing that this conversation had been building for years and could no longer be avoided. Carlos, I can't give you specific details about my work because it's classified at levels that require security clearances, but I can tell you that it's important work that serves our national security interests. National security? He repeated mockingly. Stephanie, do you hear yourself? You sound like someone playing a character in a movie. I'm not playing a character. I'm doing my job. What job? Where do you work? Who do you work for? What do you actually do all day? Each question hit me like an accusation. I wanted desperately to explain that I worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, that I was being assigned to support presidential intelligence briefings, that my analysis influenced decisions made at the highest levels of government. But every word of that explanation was classified. I work for the federal government in an intelligence capacity, I said carefully. I analyze information that helps protect American interests. That's not an answer, that's a bunch of government buzzwords. Sophia joined the conversation, having overheard from the kitchen window. Stephanie, we love you, but this whole mysterious government agent act is getting old. We're your family. We deserve better than vague non-answers. I'm not acting like anything. I'm trying to respect security protocols while still maintaining a relationship with my family. Security protocols, Sophia laughed bitterly. You know what I think? I think you got some boring government job that you're embarrassed about, so you've invented this whole classified spy story to make it sound more important than it is. The accusation was so far from the truth that it was almost funny, but it also represented the complete breakdown of trust between me and my family. They thought I was lying about having an unimportant job, when the reality was that I couldn't discuss having one of the most sensitive positions in American intelligence. Miguel appeared from inside the house, having obviously been listening to the conversation. Stephanie, here's what we know about your career, he said, counting on his fingers. You joined the Air Force 5 years ago. You've been stationed in various places doing something you claim as classified. You disappear for months at a time without communication. You can't tell us where you work, what you do, or why it matters. You have no social life that you've ever mentioned, no boyfriend, no close friends that you talk about, and now you're 26 years old with no apparent plan for the future beyond more mysterious government work. That's not, I started. I'm not finished, Miguel interrupted. From our perspective, you either have the most secretive job in the American government or you're hiding something you're ashamed of. Which seems more likely? Before I could respond, my secure phone rang with an emergency tone I had never heard before. I looked at the display and saw a classification level that made my heart stop. I have to take this, I said, walking toward the house. Of course you do, Carlos called after me. Another mysterious, important phone call that you can't discuss. I answered the phone in my childhood bedroom, the same room where I had once dreamed about serving my country in meaningful ways. Martinez, this is Deputy Director Harrison. We have a developing situation that requires immediate analysis from someone with your regional expertise. How quickly can you return to Washington? Sir, I'm on emergency leave due to my father's medical condition. I understand, and I'm sorry about your father, but this situation has presidential-level priority. We need your assessment within 24 hours. I looked around my childhood bedroom, thinking about my father in the hospital, my family's accusations, and the career I had built that none of them could understand or respect. I can be there tomorrow, sir. Excellent. Report to the Situation Room at 800. You'll be briefing senior staff. After I hung up, I sat on my childhood bed and realized that I was about to make a choice that would probably end any hope of reconciling my professional life with my family relationships. But the alternative was abandoning the most important work I had ever done. That night at dinner, I told my family I had to return to Washington immediately for a work emergency. The explosion of anger and disbelief that followed would haunt me for years to come. The explosion at the dinner table was unlike anything our family had ever experienced. Sophia threw her napkin down and stood up from the table, her face flushed with years of accumulated frustration. That's it, Stephanie. I'm done with this charade. You're telling us you have to abandon Dad while he's recovering from a heart attack because of some mysterious work emergency that you can't explain? It's not mysterious, Sophia. It's classified. Stop saying that word. Carlos slammed his fist on the table, making the dishes jump. Everything is classified with you. Your job is classified, your location is classified, your purpose in life is classified. Do you know how that sounds to people who live in the real world? Miguel, always the peacemaker, tried to intervene. Maybe we should calm down and— No, Carlos interrupted. I'm tired of tiptoeing around Stephanie's feelings about her imaginary important career. If she really worked for some vital government agency, don't you think we'd have some evidence by now? Some proof that she's not just making this up? My mother sat quietly at the head of the table, tears streaming down her face. Please stop fighting. Your father just had a heart attack. This isn't the time. Actually, Mom, this is exactly the time, Sophia said, her voice growing louder. Dad almost died, and Stephanie is about to abandon us again for her pretend job. How many family emergencies is she going to miss before we admit that she cares more about her fantasy career than her actual family?
It's not a fantasy, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Then prove it, Carlos demanded. Show us something, anything, one piece of evidence that you actually do what you claim to do. I can't. You can't because it doesn't exist, Sophia finished. Stephanie, we love you, but we're not going to keep enabling this delusion. Either you're lying to us about having an important job, or you're lying to yourself about caring about this family. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. I looked around the table at the faces of people I had loved my entire life and saw nothing but doubt, frustration, and disappointment. They thought I was either a liar or a fool, and I couldn't prove otherwise without violating every security oath I had taken. I have to pack, I said quietly, standing from the table. Of course you do, Carlos said bitterly. Run away again. It's what you do best. I went to my childhood bedroom and began throwing clothes into my suitcase with shaking hands. Through the thin walls, I could hear my family continuing their discussion about my career, my priorities, and my psychological fitness. Their voices carried clearly. She's been gone so long she doesn't even feel like our sister anymore, Sophia was saying. Maybe the military thing was a mistake from the beginning, Miguel added. Maybe Dad was right about her needing to stay home. The military thing might be real, Carlos replied, but this classified super spy nonsense is obviously compensation for having some boring desk job she's ashamed of. I finished packing and carried my suitcase to the living room where my family sat in uncomfortable silence. My mother looked up with red-rimmed eyes. You're really leaving while your father is in the hospital? I have to, Mom. People are counting on me. What people? Sophia demanded. Name one person who is counting on you for something more important than being here for your family. I couldn't answer without revealing classified information. The President of the United States was counting on my analysis. The National Security Council was waiting for my assessment. Cabinet secretaries would read my report before making decisions that could affect millions of lives. But I couldn't say any of that. I'm sorry, I said instead. I know you don't understand, but this is important. More important than Dad? Carlos asked. The question hung in the air unanswered as I walked toward the door. Stephanie, my mother called after me, when will we see you again? I don't know, Mom. Carlos stood up, his face hard with finality. Well, when you figure out what's more important, your imaginary career or your actual family, you know where to find us. But don't expect us to keep pretending your excuses make sense. The taxi ride to the airport was a blur of familiar Bakersfield streets that felt like scenes from someone else's life. I had spent 5 years building a career that mattered, becoming someone who contributed to the security of the nation, and my own family thought it was all an elaborate lie. The flight back to Washington gave me 6 hours to prepare the preliminary analysis that Deputy Director Harrison had requested. I worked on my laptop, reviewing intelligence from multiple sources about developing political instability in a region where American interests were at stake.
My assessment would inform presidential decisions about potential military intervention, diplomatic initiatives, and intelligence operations. As I worked, I thought about the conversation at my family's dinner table. They wanted proof of my importance, evidence that my work mattered. The irony was that the very sensitivity of my work prevented me from providing that proof. The more critical my role became, the less I could demonstrate its significance to people without security clearances. I arrived at Reagan National Airport at 2200 hours and took a secure transportation service directly to a safe house in Arlington, where I would spend the night reviewing additional intelligence before my morning briefing. The safe house was a nondescript townhouse that looked like any other suburban residence, but contained secure communication equipment and classified document storage. My secure phone rang at 0630 the next morning. Deputy Director Harrison's voice was tense. "Martinez, the situation has escalated overnight. You'll be briefing the president directly at 900. The chief of staff will introduce you as our lead analyst on this region." "The president, sir?" "The president. Your analysis will directly influence American foreign policy decisions. Are you prepared for that level of responsibility?" I thought about my family's accusations, their certainty that I was either lying or deluding myself about my career's importance. "Yes, sir, I'm prepared." The White House Situation Room was smaller than I had expected, but infinitely more intimidating. Around the mahogany conference table sat the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the National Security Advisor, and several other officials whose faces I recognized from classified briefings but had never imagined I would address directly. At exactly 900, President Williams entered the room. Everyone stood until he took his seat at the head of the table. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Senior Analyst Martinez from the agency. She's our lead regional expert and has prepared an assessment of the developing situation." For the next 30 minutes, I briefed the President of the United States on intelligence that would shape American foreign policy. I presented my analysis of enemy capabilities, predicted likely scenarios, and recommended courses of action based on classified information from sources around the world. The president asked detailed questions that demonstrated he had read my preliminary reports. The Secretary of Defense requested clarification on military implications. The Secretary of State wanted to understand diplomatic options. When the briefing concluded, President Williams addressed me directly. "Excellent work, Analyst Martinez. Your assessment will be critical as we formulate our response. I understand you're being considered for a permanent position supporting these briefings." "Yes, Mr. President." "Outstanding. America needs analysts of your caliber in positions of responsibility." I left the White House and realized I had just experienced the professional culmination of everything I had worked toward since leaving Bakersfield 5 years earlier. I had briefed the President of the United States on matters of national security. My assessment would influence decisions that affect millions of people worldwide. But the personal cost of that achievement was becoming unbearable.
That evening, I sat in my secure apartment in Arlington and called my mother from my personal phone, hoping to check on my father's recovery. "Stephanie," she answered, her voice cautious. "Hi, Mom. How is Dad doing?" "Better. The doctors say he can come home tomorrow." "That's wonderful news." There was a pause. "Stephanie, your brother Carlos was here today. He's still very angry about you leaving." "I know, Mom. He says he's done trying to understand what you do. He thinks you've chosen whatever imaginary career you've invented over your real family." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 5 years of misunderstanding and the impossibility of bridging the gap between my classified professional life and my family relationships. "Mom, I want you to know that everything I do is real. Everything I've told you about my work is true. I just can't provide the details you want because of security requirements." "I believe you, Mija," she said softly. "But belief isn't enough for your brothers and sisters. They need proof, and if you can't give them proof, they're going to assume you're lying." After hanging up, I sat in my apartment and realized that my family would probably never understand or accept my career choices. The very nature of my work made it impossible to prove its importance to people without security clearances. I was succeeding beyond my wildest dreams professionally, but I was losing my family in the process. What I didn't know was that within 2 weeks, everything would change in a way that would make my career impossible to deny or dismiss. 2 weeks after briefing the president, I was settling into my new routine as a permanent member of the National Intelligence Council team supporting presidential daily briefings. My security clearance had been upgraded to the highest levels possible, granting me access to intelligence so sensitive that fewer than 50 people in the entire government shared my clearance level. The work was intellectually demanding and professionally fulfilling, but the personal isolation had become nearly unbearable. I hadn't spoken to any of my siblings since leaving Bakersfield. My mother called occasionally, but our conversations were strained and brief. She would update me on my father's recovery and local family news while carefully avoiding any mention of my career or the confrontation that had driven me away from home. During those weeks, I threw myself into my work with an intensity that concerned even my supervisors. I was often the first analyst to arrive at the office and the last to leave. My reports were consistently rated as exceptional, and I had earned recognition from senior officials throughout the intelligence community. But professional success couldn't fill the void left by my fractured family relationships. On a Tuesday morning in late October, I was reviewing overnight intelligence reports in my secure office when my personal phone rang. The caller ID showed my nephew Diego's number, Sophia's oldest son, who was now 16 and apparently had my personal contact information. Aunt Stephanie? His voice sounded nervous and excited. Diego, is everything okay? Is someone hurt? No, everyone's fine. But Aunt Stephanie, I have to tell you something. I think I figured out what you really do for work. My blood ran cold. Diego, I can't discuss my work with you or anyone else in the family. I know. But listen, I've been researching intelligence careers for a school project about government jobs, and I found something really weird. What kind of something? I was trying to look up information about CIA analysts, just out of curiosity, after all the family arguments about your job. I found this public directory of federal employees with high-level security clearances. It's not supposed to be easily accessible, but I'm pretty good with computers. I felt panic rising in my chest. Diego, you need to stop researching this immediately. But Aunt Stephanie, I found your name. Not just your name, your picture, your rank, your clearance level. It says you work for the Central Intelligence Agency with something called TSSCI clearance. It says you're assigned to support National Intelligence Council operations. The room seemed to spin around me. There shouldn't have been any public directory containing that information. It had to be a security breach, a massive failure of classification protocols. Diego, listen to me very carefully. You cannot tell anyone about this. You cannot share this information with anyone, including your parents. But Aunt Stephanie, this proves you were telling the truth. This proves your job is real and important. It also proves that someone made a serious mistake in releasing classified information. If you share this with anyone, you could put people in danger, including me. I won't tell anyone, he promised. But Aunt Stephanie, doesn't this mean you can finally prove to Mom and Uncle Carlos and Uncle Miguel that they were wrong about your career? After hanging up with Diego, I immediately contacted the CIA security office to report the potential breach. Within an hour, cybersecurity specialists had identified the source. A routine database synchronization error had temporarily made portions of classified personnel records accessible through an obscure government transparency website. The breach had been active for less than 48 hours before being detected and corrected, but during that window, anyone with advanced computer skills could have accessed information about intelligence personnel. The security officer assured me that the breach affected only a small number of personnel and had been immediately contained, but the damage to operational security had already been done. That evening, as I sat in my apartment reviewing the day's events, my phone rang again. This time, it was Sophia. Stephanie, we need to talk. Sophia, if this is about what Diego found online, what did Diego find online? What are you talking about? My heart sank. Nothing. What did you want to talk about? Diego has been acting strange all day, excited about something but refusing to say what. Then tonight he asked me point blank if our family owes you an apology. I closed my eyes, realizing that despite his promise, Diego had apparently hinted to his mother about his discovery. Sophia, I can't discuss whatever Diego might have found online. Stephanie, I'm tired of playing games.
If there's something you want to tell me about your career, now would be a good time. Before I could respond, I heard commotion in the background of Sophia's call. Hold on, she said. Carlos just showed up, and he looks upset about something. I could hear muffled conversation, then Carlos's voice came on the line. Stephanie, I just got off the phone with someone from the Pentagon.
My stomach dropped. What? Someone from the Pentagon Personal Security Office called me. They said there had been a security breach involving federal employees, and they needed to verify contact information for family members of affected personnel. They asked if I was related to CIA analyst Stephanie Martinez, assigned to National Intelligence Council operations with top-secret clearance. The security breach was apparently larger than initially reported. Pentagon Security was now conducting family verification calls to ensure that classified personnel's emergency contacts were accurate and secure. What did you tell them? I asked. I told them they had the wrong number because my sister works some kind of low-level military desk job and definitely doesn't work for the CIA. There was a long pause. Then Carlos continued, his voice different. They corrected me. They said Stephanie Martinez, born in Bakersfield, California, graduated from Air Force intelligence training, currently holds TS/SCI clearance, and provides analytical support for presidential intelligence briefings. They said her work directly supports national security decisions at the highest levels of government. The silence that followed was deafening. Stephanie, Carlos said, finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Is that true? I thought about 5 years of family doubt, accusations of lying, suggestions that I was ashamed of my real job, and assumptions that I had abandoned my family for a fantasy career. Yes, Carlos, it's true. Another long pause. Then Carlos said, You work for the CIA? Yes. You have top secret clearance? Yes. You brief the president? Yes. And you've been doing this for how long? The past 5 years, Carlos. Everything I've told you has been true. I just couldn't provide details because of classification requirements. I could hear Sophia in the background asking questions, then Miguel's voice as he apparently arrived during the conversation. Stephanie, Carlos said, and I could hear something breaking in his voice. We all thought you were making it up. We thought you were lying about having an important job because you were embarrassed about whatever you really did. I know what you thought. We owe you an apology, a massive apology. Yes, you do. Can you ever forgive us? It was the question I had been waiting 5 years to hear, but now that it had arrived, I wasn't sure how to answer. The hurt from years of doubt and accusations didn't disappear just because they finally knew the truth. I don't know yet, Carlos. I need time to process this. Of course. But Stephanie, I need you to know that we're proud of you, incredibly proud. We just didn't understand. After ending the call, I sat in my apartment and tried to absorb what had just happened. A security breach that should have been a career disaster had instead become the validation I had sought for years. My family finally knew the truth about my work, my importance, and my contribution to national security. My secure phone rang. Deputy Director Harrison. Martinez, I understand there was a security incident involving your family. Yes, sir. Pentagon Security called my brother to verify emergency contact information. How are you handling the personal implications? I thought about the question. Sir, I'm not sure yet. My family spent 5 years thinking I was lying about my career. Learning the truth is complicated for all of us. Understandable. Take a few days to process this with your family. But Martinez. Yes, sir? You've earned their respect through your service, not through a security breach that revealed your work. Don't let their previous doubt diminish your sense of accomplishment. The next morning, my mother called. Mija, Carlos told me about the phone call from the Pentagon. Is it true? Are you really working for the CIA? Yes, Mom, it's true.
She was quiet for a long moment. I always believed you were doing important work. I just didn't know how important it was. I know, Mom. Your father wants to talk to you. He's been very quiet since Carlos told him about your real job. I think he's ashamed of how he reacted when you first joined the military. I'll call him later, Mom. Stephanie, I have one more question. What's that? Are you happy? Really happy? Because knowing what you do now makes your sacrifices seem even greater. I thought about the question that had haunted me since Dr. Morgan's psychological evaluation years earlier. I had professional fulfillment, important work, and the respect of senior government officials. But I had also sacrificed personal relationships, social connections, and family bonds for my career. I'm proud of my work, Mom. Whether that's the same as happiness, I'm still figuring out. 2 days later, I received an unexpected call while reviewing intelligence reports in my office. The caller ID showed my father's number. Stephanie. His voice was different than I remembered. Softer, more uncertain. Hi, Dad. I called to apologize and to tell you that I'm proud of you. Those were words I had waited my entire adult life to hear. Thank you, Dad.
I was wrong about your career. I was wrong about your choices. I was wrong about what success looks like for you. You were protecting what you thought was best for me. No, he said firmly. I was protecting my own vision of how life should work. I couldn't see past my own limitations to recognize your potential. We talked for 45 minutes, longer than any conversation we had shared since I was a child. He asked about my work within the boundaries of what I could discuss. He expressed genuine interest in my experiences and genuine regret about his years of skepticism. Stephanie, I have one favor to ask. What's that, Dad? Next time you come home for a visit, would you wear your uniform? I'd like to see my daughter in the uniform of someone who serves her country at the highest levels. I smiled, thinking about the young woman who had left Bakersfield 5 years earlier, determined to prove her family wrong about her potential. I'd be honored to, Dad. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my story wasn't really about proving my family wrong. It was about proving myself right, about my own capabilities, my own vision, my own understanding of what service and success could look like. The validation from my family was meaningful, but it was no longer necessary. I had found my purpose, made my contribution, and built a career that mattered. And that, ultimately, was enough. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.